And so to God, there's pleasure in variation, in imagination, in tears, in laughter. There's pleasure in creativity. There's pleasure and satisfaction to God when we take it serious, the purpose for which He created us, which is to be a human being, to learn to cook, to learn to love, to learn to read and write, to learn to be compassionate, helpful, thoughtful, etc., etc. Just as God Himself is in Himself that very thing which we ought to exhibit in obedience to Him, in pleasure to ourselves and to Him as human beings. My point is that what Plato talks about is basically something that is permanent, fixed. It is an idea of goodness, an idea of beauty, an idea of justice. What you find in Scripture is a God who is always just in every situation. He deals with each person, each situation, justly, consistently, passionately, emotionally involved. I don't know how else to describe it. That's what you find in Scripture. And therefore, when the Frankish, as Pamuk says, the Frankish painters painted portraits, and painted portraits of whatever, William of Orange or little girl at Halloween, whatever, you know, there was value in that. It was not a violation of the unity, as it were, of the form, of the ideal. And you are meant to recognize people because they are significant as individuals. And it changes everything. It changes your attitude towards life, towards people, towards yourself, towards history, towards responsibility, towards learning, because we better learn how to be responsible, etc., etc. And how to deal with a fallen world rather than to look at it as the will of Allah. You know, we dig under the sand to see what's there. We don't just say, oh, it's always been sand this way, and we leave it. The Jew comes back to Israel and he says, what? We're supposed to live here? We've got to get some water here. And so he gets the water, and when there isn't enough, he filters it many times, and when there isn't enough to grow all his oranges, then he develops what the Israelis have done in the 50s, you know, the most wonderful irrigation system that educates a certain number of drops to each root system so no water evaporates between the trees. And it's a deliberate effort to be children of God in a world that is real, that I need to know how it works, and transforms it into something that makes it inhabitable, somewhat better than it was before. You don't have that with Plato's ideals. Well, Plato's ideals, of which all reality is a very poor reflection, is something that you need to look for after death, when the soul is released. You think about it, but you have no certainty of its shape, of its passion, of its compassion, of its significance. You have a vague memory. There must be something to redness, rather than saying, well, it's a certain number of vibrations noted on the optical nerve as it relates these vibrations or whatever, this information to your brain, and you see it as red. And there's a spectrum, you know, you can call this red, and this is already violet because there's a little blue in it, etc., etc. There's no ideal form of which reality is a reflection. No, what we have is a changing, variable reality that we define according to make it useful, but there's no such thing as justice floating in the sky. There's a God who's always just. We as human beings ought to always seek justice, we are told in Scripture. Now, Plato's influence, seeking the order that Homer lacked